In March of 1847, workmen renovating the basement of the abandoned Cromwell estate chapel made a discovery that would shake Salem County to its very foundation. Beneath the rotting floorboards, wrapped in yellowed canvas and stacked like cordwood, lay the skeletal remains of 17 children. What authorities initially dismissed as a tragic accident soon revealed itself as something far more sinister when they uncovered Martha Cromwell's meticulous ledger, hidden behind a loose stone in the chapel wall. The leather-bound book documented 22 years of systematic murder, detailing the deaths of 35 victims between 1823 and 1845. Each entry bore a child's name, age, date of death, and most chillingly, the profit earned from their demise. Before we descend deeper into this horrific tale, understand that this story isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of American history should continue. If you're ready to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to let these forgotten victims remain silent, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. We need to build this community of people who can handle the truth about what really happened in places like Salem County. The Cromwell family had operated their house of Christian charity for nearly a quarter century, presenting themselves as the very embodiment of Christian compassion. Reverend Ezekiel Cromwell, with his silver hair and commanding presence, had built a reputation throughout the county as a man who opened his doors to society's most vulnerable children. His wife Martha, praised for her organizational skills and devotion to their cause, managed the daily operations with what neighbors called admirable efficiency. Their son Josiah, recently returned from medical studies in Philadelphia, assisted with what the family described as caring for children with special medical needs. The estate itself sprawled across 43 acres of rolling hills just outside Salem's town limits, far enough from prying eyes to ensure privacy for their charitable work. The main house, an imposing three-story federal-style mansion built by Ezekiel's father, projected prosperity and respectability. Behind it stood the chapel where the family held daily prayers with their charges, and beyond that, several outbuildings including what appeared to be a modest medical facility where Josiah tended to sick children. Local records show that between 1823 and 1845, over 200 children passed through the Cromwell House of Christian Charity. Most were orphans from the growing industrial cities to the east, brought by wagon train in groups of 8 to 12. Others were the abandoned children of immigrants, left at churches and poorhouses with nowhere else to turn. The Cromwells made regular trips to Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, returning with children they claimed to have rescued from lives of destitution and moral corruption. What made the Cromwell operation particularly insidious was how perfectly it exploited the legal and social structures of the 1820s and 1830s. Child welfare laws barely existed, record-keeping was haphazard at best, and religious institutions operated with virtually no oversight. When children arrived at the House of Christian Charity, they entered a system designed to make them disappear without anyone asking questions. The Cromwells had perfected the art of selecting victims who wouldn't be missed. Martha's ledger revealed the calculated nature of their selection process. They preferred children between the ages of 8 and 14, old enough to work but young enough to control. Orphans with absolutely no living relatives took priority, followed by children whose families had abandoned them completely. The ledger noted physical characteristics with clinical precision, recording weight, height, apparent health, and any distinguishing marks. Most disturbing were Martha's assessments of each child's potential value, rating them on factors that would determine their ultimate fate. The community of Salem County had no reason to suspect the horrors unfolding just beyond their borders. The Cromwells attended church regularly, contributed generously to local causes, and opened their home for social gatherings that reinforced their standing as pillars of Christian society. When townspeople occasionally asked about specific children they remembered seeing at the estate, the family had ready explanations. Some children had been placed with families out west, they would say. Others had tragically succumbed to illnesses despite their best care and medical attention from young Josiah. The spring of 1845 marked the end of the Cromwell operation, though not by choice. Reverend Ezekiel suffered what appeared to be a stroke during Sunday services, collapsing at the pulpit while delivering a sermon about Christian charity. He lingered for 3 weeks before dying, never regaining consciousness. Martha, overwhelmed by grief and perhaps the weight of their secrets, took her own life just days after her husband's funeral. Josiah, faced with the estate's mounting debts and his parents' deaths, abandoned the property and disappeared, leaving behind only rumors of his departure for territories out west. For nearly 2 years, the abandoned Cromwell estate stood empty, slowly deteriorating as nature began to reclaim the buildings. Local children dared each other to approach the property after dark, spreading ghost stories about the strange sounds that seemed to emanate from the old chapel. Adults avoided the place entirely, disturbed by an atmosphere of dread that seemed to permeate the grounds. When the county finally seized the property for unpaid taxes and hired workers to assess its condition for sale, they expected to find nothing more than the usual decay of an abandoned homestead. The discovery in the chapel basement changed everything. As word spread through Salem County about the skeletal remains, authorities realized they were confronting something unprecedented in their experience. The county sheriff, overwhelmed by the scope of the investigation, requested assistance from state officials. What they uncovered over the following months would reveal the Cromwell House of Christian Charity as one of the most systematic and profitable murder operations in American history, a business model built on the exploitation and destruction of society's most vulnerable members. The final desperate hours of the Cromwell family's freedom revealed the true extent of their criminal enterprise as investigators uncovered additional evidence that had been concealed throughout their 22-year operation. The discovery of a second hidden chamber beneath the medical facility exposed an even more sophisticated infrastructure than authorities had initially realized, containing detailed anatomical drawings, experimental records, and preserved specimens that documented the full scope of Josiah's medical experimentation on living victims. The family's attempted escape began in the early morning hours following Constable Morrison's initial search, when Ezekiel and Martha realized that their situation had become hopeless. Using gold hidden in various locations throughout the estate, they attempted to bribe their way to freedom through connections in the Underground Railroad network that operated between Massachusetts and Canada. Their desperation led them to reveal the existence of additional accomplices who had previously remained hidden from investigators. Josiah's complete psychological collapse during this period provided investigators with unprecedented insight into the family's methods and motivations. His rambling confessions revealed that their victim count was actually higher than Martha's ledger indicated, as some early murders had been conducted before she began maintaining detailed records. He described experiments he had performed on living children to advance his medical knowledge, procedures that went far beyond simple murder into the realm of systematic torture disguised as scientific inquiry. The discovery of correspondence with medical institutions throughout New England revealed the shocking extent of their customer network. Harvard Medical College, Yale University, and the University of Pennsylvania had all purchased specimens from the Cromwell operation, though officials at these institutions claimed ignorance about the source of their anatomical materials. The premium prices paid for child cadavers had created a lucrative market that the family had exploited with devastating efficiency. Martha's final attempt to destroy evidence led investigators to additional hiding places throughout the estate where crucial documentation had been concealed. Her frantic efforts to burn records revealed the location of a buried strongbox containing insurance policies taken out on murdered children, correspondence with corrupt officials in multiple states, and detailed plans for expanding their operation to include adult victims. These documents demonstrated that the family had been planning to escalate their criminal activities even further. The investigation into their financial records revealed the staggering profits generated by their murder operation. Over 22 years, the Cromwell family had accumulated wealth equivalent to that of the most successful merchants and professionals in the region, all derived from the systematic killing of vulnerable children. Their bank records showed regular deposits that corresponded exactly with the dates of murders recorded in Martha's ledger, providing irrefutable proof of their guilt. What strikes you most about this systematic murder operation that generated enormous profits from the deaths of 35 innocent children? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how the Cromwell family was able to operate undetected for over 2 decades. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more investigations into America's most shocking criminal cases that mainstream historians often ignore. The family's network of accomplices extended far beyond Salem County, encompassing corrupt officials, medical professionals, and transportation workers across multiple states. As news of the investigation spread, several key figures fled their jurisdictions rather than face questioning about their involvement. The scope of this conspiracy revealed systematic corruption in institutions that were supposed to protect society's most vulnerable members. Ezekiel's final sermon, delivered from his jail cell to a visiting minister, provided disturbing insights into the psychological rationalization that had enabled the family's crimes. He claimed that their actions had served a higher purpose by advancing medical knowledge and that the children they killed had been rescued from lives of poverty and suffering. His complete lack of remorse shocked observers and demonstrated the profound moral corruption that had enabled decades of systematic murder. The escape attempt ultimately failed when the family was apprehended at a boarding house near the Canadian border, betrayed by an accomplice who sought to claim the substantial reward offered for their capture. Their arrest marked the end of one of the most systematic and profitable murder operations in American criminal history, but questions remained about how many similar enterprises might be operating undetected in other locations. The evidence gathered during the final phase of the investigation revealed that the Cromwell operation had been far more sophisticated than initially suspected. They had maintained detailed medical records on each victim, conducted systematic experiments to refine their killing methods, and established quality control procedures to ensure that their products met the exacting standards demanded by medical institutions. This level of organization suggested that their operation could serve as a model for other criminal enterprises. The psychological profiles developed by investigators during this period revealed how ordinary people could become systematic killers when motivated by profit and protected by institutional corruption. The family's gradual descent into murder had been facilitated by a society that valued respectability over scrutiny and trusted religious authority without verification. Their case would ultimately force fundamental changes in how charitable institutions were monitored and regulated. The discovery of additional victims during the final search brought the confirmed death toll to 35 children, though investigators suspected that the actual number might be higher. Some early victims had been buried in unmarked graves on the estate property, while others had been completely disposed of through the family's network of corrupt contacts. The true scope of their crimes would never be fully known, adding to the horror of their systematic murder operation. The trials of the Cromwell family members began in September of 1845, drawing unprecedented public attention as the full scope of their 22-year murder operation was presented to shocked juries and courtroom observers. The Massachusetts Attorney General personally prosecuted the case, recognizing that the systematic nature of their crimes demanded the strongest possible response from the legal system. The proceedings would ultimately establish legal precedents for prosecuting organized murder enterprises and force significant reforms in child welfare oversight. Ezekiel Cromwell's trial commenced first, with prosecutors presenting overwhelming evidence of his leadership role in the family's criminal enterprise. Martha's ledger provided detailed documentation of his involvement in victim selection and profit distribution, while Josiah's confessions revealed his father's role in planning and coordinating their operations. The prosecution argued that Ezekiel had corrupted his religious authority to facilitate systematic murder, representing a betrayal of trust that demanded the ultimate penalty. The defense strategy attempted to portray Ezekiel as a man who had gradually lost control of his family's activities, claiming that Martha and Josiah had manipulated him into participating in crimes that violated his fundamental Christian beliefs. This approach failed completely when prosecutors presented evidence of his active participation in victim acquisition, his personal correspondence with corrupt officials, and his detailed knowledge of their financial operations. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all 35 counts of murder. Martha Cromwell's trial revealed the calculating intelligence that had made their operation possible for over 2 decades. Her meticulous record-keeping, which had initially appeared to be evidence of mental disorder, was recognized by prosecutors as proof of her central role in coordinating their criminal enterprise. The prosecution presented her as the operational mastermind whose business acumen had transformed random killings into a systematic murder operation that generated enormous profits. The courtroom was stunned by Martha's complete lack of remorse throughout her trial proceedings. When given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, she delivered a cold recitation of the financial benefits their operation had provided to medical institutions, claiming that their work had advanced scientific knowledge and benefited society. Her inability to acknowledge the humanity of their victims demonstrated a level of moral corruption that horrified observers and sealed her fate with the jury. Josiah's trial presented unique challenges due to his mental breakdown and the medical expertise that had made him the family's most effective killer. The prosecution argued that his education and training made his crimes particularly heinous, as he had used legitimate medical knowledge to torture and murder helpless children. The defense attempted to claim insanity, but their strategy collapsed when prosecutors demonstrated that his detailed experimental record showed clear evidence of premeditation and rational planning. The trials revealed the extent of corruption that had enabled the Cromwell operation to continue undetected for so long. Testimony from witnesses exposed a network of officials who had accepted bribes to falsify records, ignore suspicious circumstances, and actively obstruct investigations. Sheriff's Deputy William Morse was tried in absentia after fleeing to avoid prosecution, while County Clerk Harrison Blackwood received a 10-year prison sentence for his role in providing false documentation. Public reaction to the trials was intense and widespread, with newspapers throughout New England publishing detailed accounts of the proceedings and editorial commentary demanding justice for the victims. Religious leaders struggled to address how a minister could have committed such systematic atrocities, while medical professionals faced scrutiny about their purchasing practices and oversight of anatomical specimen sources. The case forced uncomfortable questions about institutional accountability and the protection of vulnerable populations. The broader implications of the Cromwell case extended far beyond criminal justice to encompass fundamental questions about child welfare and institutional oversight. The trials revealed how easily charitable organizations could exploit vulnerable populations when operating without effective supervision or accountability. Massachusetts legislators began drafting new laws requiring regular inspections of orphanages and stricter documentation of child placements, reforms that would eventually be adopted throughout New England. The financial investigation conducted during the trial proceedings revealed that the family had accumulated wealth exceeding $15,000 through their murder operation, an enormous sum for the period that demonstrated the profitability of their crimes. This money had been used to maintain their respectable lifestyle, bribe corrupt officials, and expand their criminal infrastructure. The court ordered that all family assets be liquidated to provide compensation for victims' families and fund improvements in child welfare systems. The testimony of Mary Catherine O'Brien provided the emotional centerpiece of the trials, as she courageously recounted her experiences at the estate and identified specific children who had been murdered during her residence there. Her detailed descriptions of the family's methods and the atmosphere of terror they created helped juries understand the psychological impact of their crimes on surviving victims. Her bravery in testifying despite obvious emotional trauma inspired other witnesses to come forward with additional evidence. The trials also revealed the geographic scope of the Cromwell operation, with evidence presented showing that they had acquired victims from orphanages and poorhouses throughout New England. This interstate dimension of their crimes prompted federal authorities to begin investigating similar operations in other regions, leading to the discovery of additional murder enterprises that had used the Cromwell model as inspiration for their own criminal activities. The legal precedents established during the Cromwell trials would influence criminal prosecution strategies for decades to come, particularly in cases involving organized criminal enterprises and systematic abuse of vulnerable populations. The court's recognition that their crimes represented more than individual murders but constituted a criminal enterprise requiring enhanced penalties would provide a framework for prosecuting similar cases in the future. The executions of Ezekiel and Martha Cromwell took place on a cold December morning in 1845, witnessed by over 3,000 spectators who had travelled from throughout New England to see justice delivered for the 35 murdered children. The public hanging represented not only the end of their criminal lives but also a moment of collective catharsis for a community that had struggled to comprehend how such systematic evil could have operated undetected in their midst for over 2 decades. Ezekiel maintained his composure until the final moments, delivering a brief speech from the gallows in which he continued to claim that their actions had served a higher purpose in advancing medical knowledge. His complete lack of remorse, even facing death, demonstrated the profound moral corruption that had enabled him to rationalize decades of child murder. When the trap door opened beneath his feet, spectators reported feeling a collective sense of relief that his reign of terror had finally ended. Martha's execution followed immediately after her husband's, and her demeanor provided a stark contrast to his defiant final words. She appeared to have finally grasped the enormity of their crimes and spent her last moments asking forgiveness from the families of their victims. Her final statement acknowledged the suffering they had caused and expressed hope that their deaths would provide some measure of closure for those who had lost children to their operation. Josiah Cromwell's fate differed from his parents due to his cooperation with authorities and his obvious mental breakdown following their arrest. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment rather than execution, recognizing that his confessions had been crucial in understanding the full scope of their operation and identifying additional victims. He would spend the remainder of his life in solitary confinement at the Massachusetts State Prison, where he died in 1863, apparently by suicide. The immediate aftermath of the executions brought significant changes to child welfare practices throughout Massachusetts and neighboring states. The legislature passed comprehensive reforms requiring regular inspections of all charitable institutions, mandatory documentation of child placements, and criminal background investigations for anyone seeking to operate orphanages or similar facilities. These reforms, known collectively as the Cromwell Acts, would serve as a model for child protection legislation throughout the United States. The Cromwell estate was demolished in the spring of 1846, with every building razed to prevent the property from becoming a macabre tourist attraction. The land was eventually converted into a memorial park dedicated to the memory of their 35 confirmed victims, each of whom was honored with a small granite marker bearing their name and age at death. The memorial served as a permanent reminder of the price of institutional failure and societal complacency. The broader impact of the Cromwell case extended far beyond Massachusetts, prompting investigations into similar charitable institutions throughout New England and beyond. These inquiries revealed additional cases of abuse and exploitation, though none approached the systematic murder operation that the Cromwell family had perfected. Several other families were prosecuted for lesser crimes against children in their care, suggesting that the Cromwell case had exposed a broader pattern of institutional corruption and abuse. Medical colleges throughout the region faced intense scrutiny regarding their purchasing practices for anatomical specimens, leading to comprehensive reforms in how cadavers were acquired and documented. Harvard Medical College, Yale University, and other prestigious institutions implemented strict new policies requiring detailed documentation of specimen sources and regular audits to ensure compliance with legal and ethical standards. The medical profession's complicity in creating a market for murdered children forced a fundamental re-evaluation of educational practices and professional ethics. The psychological impact of the Cromwell case on the Salem County community proved lasting and profound. Families who had considered placing children with charitable institutions became deeply suspicious of such organizations, while neighbors struggled with guilt over their failure to detect the horrors occurring in their midst. The case shattered the community's faith in religious authority and institutional respectability, creating a permanent wariness about trusting appearances over substantive investigation. Mary Catherine O'Brien emerged as a symbol of survival and courage, using her experience to advocate for improved child welfare policies and institutional oversight. She married a local farmer in 1847 and raised 5 children of her own, always ensuring they understood the importance of protecting vulnerable members of society. Her advocacy work contributed significantly to the passage of additional child protection legislation throughout the 1850s and 1860s. The financial investigation following the trials revealed that the Cromwell family had accumulated profits exceeding $20,000 through their murder operation, money that was distributed among victims' families and used to fund the new oversight mechanisms required by reform legislation. This compensation provided some measure of practical assistance to grieving families, though it could never truly address the emotional devastation caused by their losses. What lessons should we draw from this horrific chapter in American history about the importance of institutional oversight and protection of vulnerable populations? Share your thoughts in the comments about how we can ensure that such systematic abuse never happens again. If this investigation into the Cromwell family's crimes has opened your eyes to forgotten tragedies in our nation's past, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our efforts to honor these victims by telling their stories. The legacy of the Cromwell case continues to influence child welfare policies and criminal justice practices more than a century and a half after their executions. Their systematic approach to murder established legal precedents for prosecuting organized criminal enterprises, while the institutional failures that enabled their operation provided crucial lessons about the importance of oversight and accountability. The 35 children who died at their hands were not forgotten but became catalysts for reforms that protected countless other vulnerable young lives. The Cromwell family's transformation from respected community leaders to systematic killers serves as a permanent reminder that evil can flourish when society fails to maintain vigilance over those entrusted with protecting its most vulnerable members. Their story stands as both a tribute to their victims and a warning about the eternal need for institutional accountability and moral courage. The Cromwell family's rise to prominence in Salem County began long before their descent into murder. Ezekiel Cromwell arrived in the area in 1820, a young minister with impressive credentials from Princeton Theological Seminary and letters of recommendation from established clergy throughout New England. He possessed the rare combination of scholarly intelligence and charismatic presence that made him immediately attractive to the growing community's religious establishment. Within months of his arrival, he had secured the position of assistant pastor at Salem's First Presbyterian Church, and within 2 years, he was leading his own congregation. Martha Whitmore became Martha Cromwell in the spring of 1821, bringing to the marriage not only her own respected family name but also a substantial dowry that would prove crucial to their future operations. The Whitmore family had established themselves as successful merchants, and Martha had inherited both their business acumen and their extensive network of contacts throughout the region. Her marriage to the rising young minister created a powerful alliance that positioned the couple at the center of Salem County's social and economic elite. The birth of their son Josiah in 1822 completed what appeared to be a perfect family portrait. Neighbors would later recall how the young family seemed blessed with every advantage, prosperity, social standing, and a shared commitment to Christian service. Ezekiel's sermons drew larger crowds each Sunday, while Martha's organizational skills made her indispensable to various charitable committees and social organizations. When they announced their intention to establish a home for orphan children in 1823, the community responded with enthusiastic support and generous financial contributions. The House of Christian Charity opened its doors in September of 1823 with 8 children, all orphans from Boston's overcrowded almshouses. The Cromwells had spent months preparing for this moment, converting several rooms in their mansion's east wing into dormitories and establishing routines that would accommodate their young charges. Martha took particular pride in the children's education, hiring a tutor and ensuring that each child received instruction in reading, writing, and arithmetic alongside their religious training. For the first year of operation, everything appeared to function exactly as the community had hoped. The children were clean, well-fed, and properly educated. They attended church services regularly, participated in community events, and demonstrated the kind of moral improvement that validated the Cromwells' approach to charitable work. Local families began recommending the House of Christian Charity to relatives and friends in other communities, helping to establish a reputation that would eventually attract children from across New England. If this investigation into one of America's most calculated family murder operations is keeping you engaged, please hit that like button to help support our content. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss these deep dives into forgotten history. Share this video with anyone who appreciates true crime stories that most people are too afraid to tell. What made the Cromwell operation particularly effective was how seamlessly it integrated into the existing social and economic structures of rural New England. The 1820s were a time of rapid social change, with increasing numbers of orphaned and abandoned children overwhelming the limited charitable institutions available. The Cromwells positioned themselves as a solution to this growing crisis, offering to care for children that other institutions couldn't accommodate. Their willingness to take the most difficult cases, including children with behavioral problems or minor physical disabilities, only enhanced their reputation for Christian compassion. Behind this carefully constructed facade, however, the family was already developing the systems that would enable their future crimes. Martha's business background proved invaluable in creating record-keeping systems that appeared thorough and professional while actually obscuring the fate of individual children. She established correspondence with officials in multiple cities, creating a network of contacts who would refer children to their care without maintaining detailed follow-up records. Josiah's role in the family operation became increasingly important as he grew older. Even as a young teenager, he displayed an unusual fascination with medical procedures and anatomy that his parents encouraged through private tutoring and access to medical texts. When he left for formal medical training in Philadelphia in 1840, he carried with him not only his parents' financial support but also their expectation that his education would serve the family's broader purposes upon his return. The community's trust in the Cromwell family was so complete that even unusual circumstances failed to generate suspicion. When children occasionally disappeared from the estate, the family's explanations were accepted without question. The distances involved in 19th-century travel made verification difficult, and the Cromwells had established such a strong reputation for placing children in good homes that few people thought to investigate further. This trust would prove to be the foundation upon which they built their systematic murder operation. The transition from legitimate charity to systematic murder began gradually during the winter of 1824, less than 18 months after the House of Christian Charity opened its doors. Martha's ledger would later reveal that their first victim was 11-year-old Thomas Henley, an orphan from Hartford whose death she recorded with chilling matter-of-factness on February 14, 1825. The entry noted his cause of death as consumption, his burial location as the family cemetery, and most tellingly, a profit of $47 derived from his demise. The Cromwells had discovered what would become the foundation of their operation: dead children were worth more than living ones. Thomas had arrived at the estate in poor health, making him an ideal test case for their emerging business model. When he succumbed to his illness, rather than simply burying him and notifying authorities as required by law, the family saw an opportunity. Ezekiel had established connections with medical colleges in Boston and Philadelphia through his seminary contacts, institutions that desperately needed cadavers for anatomical study and were willing to pay handsomely for fresh specimens. Martha's organizational skills proved crucial in developing the systems that would enable their crimes to continue undetected for over 2 decades. She created false death certificates using connections to corrupt officials in 3 different counties, established relationships with wagon drivers willing to transport suspicious cargo without asking questions, and developed a network of contacts at medical institutions who would purchase bodies with minimal documentation. Most importantly, she learned to select victims whose disappearances would generate the least attention. The family's victim selection criteria evolved rapidly during their first year of murders. They preferred children who had arrived without any personal belongings or documentation, making it easier to claim they had never existed. Orphans with speech difficulties or mental limitations became particularly valuable targets, as their inability to communicate effectively meant fewer people would remember specific details about them. Children who appeared sickly or malnourished could be killed and their deaths attributed to natural causes without arousing suspicion. By the summer of 1825, the Cromwells had refined their methods to a horrifying degree of efficiency. Martha maintained detailed records of each child's arrival, including assessments of their potential value and risk factors associated with their disappearance. She developed a coding system that allowed her to track which children were destined for adoption placement and which were marked for death. The ledger entries from this period show a systematic approach that treated human lives as inventory to be managed and monetized. The physical infrastructure of their operation expanded to accommodate their growing business. Ezekiel oversaw the construction of what appeared to be a modest medical facility behind the main house, ostensibly for treating sick children under Josiah's care. In reality, this building served as the primary location for their murder operations, equipped with medical instruments, preservation materials, and storage areas for bodies awaiting transport. The basement of the chapel was converted into a secondary storage facility, with stone shelves built into the walls to accommodate multiple corpses. Josiah's role in the family operation became increasingly central as he developed the medical skills necessary for their crimes. Even before his formal training in Philadelphia, he demonstrated an aptitude for anatomy and surgical procedures that made him invaluable to their business model. Under his father's guidance, he learned to kill children in ways that would appear natural while preserving the integrity of their bodies for sale to medical institutions. His methods evolved from crude poisoning to sophisticated techniques that left no obvious evidence of murder. The family's integration of their criminal activities with their legitimate charitable work created a perfect cover for their operations. They continued to place some children with adoptive families, maintaining their reputation for successful placements while using these legitimate cases to explain the presence of multiple children on their property. Visitors to the estate would see happy, healthy children engaged in normal activities, never suspecting that others were being systematically murdered in the buildings behind the main house. By the end of 1825, Martha's ledger recorded 7 deaths and profits totaling over $300, a substantial sum for the period. More disturbing than the financial records were her increasingly clinical observations about which methods proved most effective and which types of children generated the highest prices from their buyers. The transformation from charitable caregivers to cold-blooded killers was complete, and they had established the operational foundation that would enable them to murder 28 more children over the following 2 decades. The years between 1826 and 1830 marked the systematic refinement of the Cromwell murder operation into a sophisticated business enterprise. Martha's ledger entries from this period reveal an increasingly methodical approach to victim selection, with detailed criteria that maximized profit while minimizing risk of discovery. The family had learned from their early experiences and developed protocols that would serve them for the remainder of their deadly career. Their victim selection process became ruthlessly efficient during this period. Children arriving at the House of Christian Charity underwent what appeared to be a routine medical examination by young Josiah, but was actually a comprehensive assessment of their value as murder victims. Martha recorded detailed measurements, estimated body weight, and noted any physical abnormalities that might affect the marketability of their remains. Children with unusual anatomical features commanded premium prices from medical colleges, while those with obvious diseases or deformities were typically killed quickly and sold to institutions with less stringent requirements. The family's network of corrupt officials expanded significantly during this period, creating a web of complicity that protected their operations from official scrutiny. County Clerk Harrison Blackwood, whose gambling debts had made him susceptible to bribes, provided false death certificates and burial permits that legitimized their activities in official records. Sheriff's Deputy William Morse, facing financial ruin from failed investments, agreed to ignore suspicious circumstances surrounding child deaths at the estate in exchange for regular payments. These corrupt relationships created a protective barrier around the Cromwell operation that would prove nearly impenetrable. Martha's business acumen reached its full expression during this period as she developed increasingly sophisticated methods for disposing of evidence and maximizing profits. She established relationships with wagon drivers who operated regular routes between Salem County and major cities, creating a reliable transportation network for their grisly cargo. These men, paid handsomely for their discretion, asked no questions about the wooden crates they transported to medical colleges and private physicians throughout New England. The family's legitimate charitable activities served as an increasingly important cover for their criminal enterprise. They maintained a carefully selected group of healthy, attractive children who served as living advertisements for their work, appearing at community events and church gatherings to demonstrate the success of their charitable mission. These showcase children receive excellent care, education, and eventually placement with respectable families, creating a public record of successful outcomes that deflected suspicion from their murder victims. Ezekiel's role evolved during this period from active participant to strategic overseer of their expanding operation. His position as a respected minister provided crucial legitimacy to their activities, while his extensive contacts throughout New England's religious community created opportunities for acquiring new victims. He developed relationships with ministers in urban areas who regularly encountered abandoned children, establishing a referral network that brought a steady stream of potential victims to their estate. The physical infrastructure of their operation underwent significant expansion during this period. The medical facility behind the main house was enlarged and equipped with more sophisticated preservation equipment, allowing them to maintain bodies in saleable condition for longer periods. They constructed a hidden tunnel connecting the medical building to the chapel basement, enabling them to move bodies without risk of detection by visitors or legitimate residents of the estate. Josiah's medical knowledge advanced considerably during this period, both through formal study and practical experience with their victims. He developed increasingly sophisticated methods for killing children that left no obvious evidence of murder, perfecting techniques that would later be documented in his medical school notes. His expertise in anatomy and preservation methods made him invaluable to their operation, as he could prepare bodies to medical college specifications and maximize their sale value. The family's record-keeping system became increasingly elaborate during this period, with Martha maintaining separate ledgers for legitimate placements, victim records, and financial transactions. Her business correspondence reveals a woman who had completely compartmentalized her activities, conducting legitimate charity work with apparent sincerity while simultaneously operating one of the most systematic murder enterprises in American history. The emotional detachment evident in her record suggests a complete moral transformation that enabled her to view children as mere commodities. By 1830, the Cromwell operation had achieved a level of efficiency and profitability that would sustain them for the next 15 years. They had murdered 19 children, generated profits exceeding $1,500, and established systems that could accommodate their growing ambitions. The foundation was in place for the peak years of their operation, when they would claim 16 more lives before their eventual discovery. The decade of the 1830s represented the apex of the Cromwell murder operation, a period when their systematic killing reached unprecedented levels of efficiency and profitability. Martha's ledger entries from this era reveal a business operating at peak capacity, with multiple victims processed each month and profits that transformed the family into one of Salem County's wealthiest households. The operation had evolved far beyond their original crude methods into a sophisticated enterprise that supplied bodies to medical institutions across 3 states. Their network expansion during this period was remarkable in its scope and audacity. Josiah, now returned from his formal medical training in Philadelphia, brought with him contacts at Harvard Medical College, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania who were eager to purchase high-quality anatomical specimens. These prestigious institutions paid premium prices for fresh cadavers, particularly those of children whose smaller size made them ideal for teaching purposes. The family's reputation for providing well-preserved specimens with accurate documentation made them preferred suppliers to these establishments. The victim acquisition process became increasingly systematic during this peak period. Martha established formal relationships with orphanages and poorhouses in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Hartford, presenting herself as a charitable woman with space for children that other institutions couldn't accommodate. Her correspondence with these facilities reveals a calculated approach to selecting the most vulnerable targets, focusing on children with no living relatives, no documented history, and medical conditions that would explain their eventual disappearance. Josiah's medical expertise reached its full expression during this period, as he developed killing methods that were both efficient and profitable. His training had taught him to identify the most valuable organs and tissues for medical study, allowing him to maximize the sale value of each victim. He perfected preservation techniques that maintained bodies in pristine condition for weeks, enabling the family to stockpile inventory and coordinate shipments to multiple buyers simultaneously. The family's financial success during this period was extraordinary, with Martha's records showing profits that exceeded the annual income of most professional men. They used this wealth to further enhance their operations, purchasing better equipment, bribing additional officials, and maintaining the lavish lifestyle that reinforced their social standing. Their prosperity also enabled them to be generous contributors to local charities and church activities, creating goodwill that protected them from suspicion. If these revelations about the Cromwell family's systematic murder operation are shocking you as much as they shocked investigators in 1847, please share this video with others who need to know these hidden truths about American history. Hit that like button to support our work bringing these suppressed stories to light, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our investigations into the darkest chapters of our past. The logistics of their operation during this peak period were remarkably sophisticated for the 1830s. Martha coordinated shipments to multiple destinations simultaneously, maintaining detailed schedules that ensured fresh deliveries to their various buyers. She employed a network of wagon drivers who operated on regular routes, creating a reliable transportation system that could move their grisly cargo without attracting attention. The family even invested in specialized containers designed to preserve bodies during transport, ensuring that their products arrived in optimal condition. Their legitimate charitable activities served as an increasingly important cover during this period of intense criminal activity. The House of Christian Charity maintained its reputation through carefully orchestrated public relations efforts, including regular visits from local dignitaries and religious leaders who could testify to the family's good work. These visitors saw only the showcase children, healthy and happy youngsters who were genuinely being prepared for adoption, never suspecting the horrors occurring in the buildings behind the main house. The psychological transformation of the family members during this period was complete and chilling. Martha's correspondence reveals a woman who had entirely compartmentalized her activities, discussing charitable work with apparent sincerity while simultaneously managing a murder enterprise with cold efficiency. Ezekiel's sermons from this period, preserved in church records, show him preaching about Christian compassion and the protection of innocents while participating in their systematic destruction. The geographic expansion of their network during this period brought victims from as far away as Maine and Virginia, creating a supply chain that could sustain their growing operation. Martha's contacts in major ports enabled them to acquire immigrant children who had been separated from families during the journey to America, victims whose disappearances would never be investigated because no one knew they had ever existed. By the end of the 1830s, the Cromwell operation had achieved a level of success that would sustain them through the following decade. They had murdered 31 children, generated profits exceeding $4,000, and established a network that reached throughout New England. Their operation had become so sophisticated and profitable that they began to believe themselves untouchable, a confidence that would eventually contribute to their downfall. The early 1840s brought the first serious threats to the Cromwell operation's continued success, forcing the family to implement increasingly desperate security measures to protect their lucrative murder enterprise. Martha's ledger entries from this period reveal a growing paranoia and the emergence of witnesses who posed genuine dangers to their carefully constructed facade. The family's response to these threats would demonstrate the ruthless lengths they were willing to go to preserve their operation. The first significant threat emerged in the spring of 1841 when Sarah McKenna, a seamstress from Salem Village, began asking uncomfortable questions about children she had seen at the estate. McKenna had been hired to create clothing for the House of Christian Charity residents and had developed relationships with several children during her visits. When 3 of these children disappeared within a 2-week period, she noticed their absence and began inquiring about their whereabouts. Martha's initial explanations about sudden placements with families out west failed to satisfy McKenna's growing suspicions. The seamstress proved persistent in her inquiries, even approaching other townspeople to ask if they had noticed the pattern of disappearances at the Cromwell estate. Her questions began to generate discussions that threatened to expose the operation's carefully maintained secrecy. Martha recognized the danger immediately and consulted with Ezekiel about how to address this potential witness. Their solution was both swift and permanent. Sarah McKenna was found dead in her cottage 3 days later, apparently the victim of a robbery gone wrong. The McKenna murder represented a significant escalation in the family's criminal activities, marking their transition from killing only their intended victims to eliminating anyone who threatened their operation. Josiah's medical expertise proved valuable in staging the seamstress's death to appear accidental, while their corrupt contacts in law enforcement ensured that the investigation remained superficial. The murder sent a clear message to anyone else who might consider asking questions about the Cromwell operation. Additional security measures implemented during this period included the construction of higher walls around the estate property and the installation of locked gates that restricted access to authorized visitors only. The family hired additional workers whose primary responsibility was monitoring the grounds for unwanted observers and ensuring that their criminal activities remained hidden from view. These security enhancements created an atmosphere of secrecy that should have aroused suspicion but was instead explained as necessary protection for vulnerable children. The family's financial activities during this period also attracted unwanted attention from banking officials who noticed the unusual nature of their transactions. Large cash deposits from unnamed sources, frequent wire transfers to medical institutions, and purchases of suspicious equipment raised questions that Martha struggled to answer convincingly. To address these concerns, she diversified their banking relationships across multiple institutions and began conducting more transactions through intermediaries who could obscure the money trail. Insurance fraud became an increasingly important component of their operation during this period, as the family discovered they could profit from both killing children and collecting on policies taken out in their names. Martha established relationships with corrupt insurance agents who were willing to process questionable claims in exchange for substantial bribes. This additional revenue stream provided another layer of protection by creating legitimate financial records that could explain their growing wealth. The psychological strain of maintaining their operation under increased scrutiny began to affect all family members during this period. Ezekiel's sermons became increasingly focused on themes of divine judgment and the punishment of sinners, while Martha's correspondence reveals growing anxiety about potential exposure. Josiah developed a pronounced paranoia about strangers and began carrying weapons whenever he left the estate property. Their victim selection criteria became even more restrictive during this period, as they focused exclusively on children whose disappearances would generate minimal attention. They avoided taking children from local families and concentrated instead on acquiring victims from distant locations who had no connections to Salem County. This caution reduced their victim acquisition rate but provided additional security against detection. The family's relationship with their corrupt official network required constant maintenance during this period, as several key contacts began demanding increased payments for their continued silence. Sheriff's Deputy William Morse threatened to expose their activities unless his monthly bribes were doubled, while County Clerk Harrison Blackwood began making veiled references to his knowledge of their crimes during social gatherings. These escalating demands created financial pressure that forced the family to increase their killing rate to maintain profitability. By the end of 1842, the Cromwell operation had survived its first serious challenges but at considerable cost to their security and peace of mind. They had murdered 2 additional witnesses, implemented expensive security measures, and faced increasing demands from their corrupt contacts. The foundation of their operation remained intact, but cracks were beginning to appear that would eventually lead to their downfall. The systematic unraveling of the Cromwell murder operation began in earnest during the winter of 1843, when Rebecca Hartwell, a schoolteacher from neighboring Millfield, started maintaining detailed records of missing children that would eventually expose the family's deadly enterprise. Hartwell had been contacted by several families searching for children who had supposedly been placed with the House of Christian Charity, and her methodical approach to tracking these inquiries would prove to be the beginning of the end for the Cromwell family. Unlike previous threats to their operation, Hartwell represented a different kind of danger. As an educated woman with connections throughout the region's educational network, she had access to resources and contacts that enabled her to conduct a more thorough investigation than local officials had ever attempted. Her correspondence with teachers, ministers, and social workers in multiple states began to reveal patterns that suggested something was fundamentally wrong with the Cromwell operation. Hartwell's investigation began when Margaret and Thomas Sullivan approached her seeking help in locating their nephew, 12-year-old Patrick Sullivan, who had been placed with the Cromwells 18 months earlier. The boy's parents had died in a factory fire, and the Sullivans had arranged for his care at the House of Christian Charity with the understanding that they would maintain contact and eventually reclaim him when their financial situation improved. When their letters went unanswered and their visits to the estate were rebuffed, they turned to Hartwell for assistance. The teacher's initial inquiries to the Cromwell family met with the same evasive responses that had satisfied previous questioners. Martha claimed that Patrick had been successfully placed with a farming family in Ohio and was thriving in his new environment. When Hartwell requested specific contact information to verify the boy's well-being, Martha provided an address that subsequent investigation revealed to be fictitious. This deception prompted Hartwell to expand her inquiry into other missing children. Through her network of educational contacts, Hartwell began collecting information about other children who had disappeared after being placed with the Cromwells. Her methodical approach revealed a disturbing pattern: children who entered the House of Christian Charity frequently vanished without trace, while the family's explanations for their whereabouts consistently proved to be false when investigated. By the spring of 1844, she had documented 17 cases of missing children whose disappearances followed the same pattern. The teacher's investigation gained momentum when she connected with Dr. Samuel Whitmore, a physician in Boston who had begun questioning the source of anatomical specimens being supplied to medical colleges throughout New England. Whitmore had noticed an unusual number of child cadavers bearing similar preparation marks and preservation techniques, suggesting they originated from a single source. His medical expertise enabled him to identify evidence that many of these specimens had not died from natural causes. If this systematic investigation that finally exposed the Cromwell family's decades of murder is as compelling to you as it was to authorities in 1844, please let us know in the comments what you think about Rebecca Hartwell's courage in pursuing the truth. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these investigations into America's hidden criminal history that most people are too afraid to discuss. The collaboration between Hartwell and Whitmore created a formidable investigative team that combined educational resources with medical expertise. Their joint inquiry revealed connections between missing children and suspicious anatomical specimens that provided the first concrete evidence of the Cromwell family's criminal activities. Whitmore's access to medical college records enabled them to trace specific specimens back to their probable sources, while Hartwell's educational network provided information about the children who had disappeared. The family's response to this emerging investigation was characteristically ruthless. When Martha learned about Hartwell's activities through her network of informants, she immediately began planning to eliminate this new threat. However, the teacher's prominent position in the community and extensive connections made her assassination significantly more dangerous than previous witness eliminations. The family realized that killing Hartwell would likely generate the kind of intensive investigation they had always managed to avoid. Instead of murder, the Cromwells attempted to discredit Hartwell through a campaign of character assassination that utilized their extensive social connections. Ezekiel used his pulpit to deliver sermons about the dangers of gossip and false accusations, while Martha spread rumors about the teacher's mental stability and reliability. They enlisted their corrupt contacts in law enforcement to suggest that Hartwell's investigation was motivated by personal grudges rather than legitimate concerns. The family's desperation became increasingly apparent as they implemented additional security measures designed to prevent further evidence gathering. They restricted access to the estate even more severely, began destroying records that might incriminate them, and accelerated plans to eliminate the most damaging evidence of their crimes. The chapel basement, which had served as their primary body storage facility, was hastily excavated and the remains relocated to more secure locations. Despite these efforts, Hartwell's investigation continued to gain support from unexpected sources. Several townspeople who had harbored private doubts about the Cromwell operation began sharing their concerns with the teacher, providing additional evidence of suspicious activities at the estate. Former employees of the family came forward with disturbing accounts of strange sounds, unusual odors, and mysterious activities that had occurred during their tenure. By the end of 1844, the Cromwell family faced the most serious threat to their operation in over 2 decades of criminal activity. The systematic investigation being conducted by Hartwell and Whitmore had gathered sufficient evidence to support official intervention, while the family's previous methods of eliminating threats were no longer viable. The foundation of fear and corruption that had protected their operation for so long was beginning to crumble under sustained scrutiny. The emergence of Mary Catherine O'Brien as a key witness in early 1845 provided investigators with the breakthrough they desperately needed to build a case against the Cromwell family. O'Brien, now 19 years old, had survived her time at the House of Christian Charity 6 years earlier by pure chance, escaping the fate that had befallen 34 other children. Her detailed testimony would provide the first eyewitness account of the horrors that had occurred within the estate's walls. O'Brien had been 13 when she arrived at the Cromwell estate in the autumn of 1839, one of 8 children brought from a Boston orphanage by Martha Cromwell during what appeared to be a routine placement visit. Unlike her fellow arrivals, Mary Catherine possessed certain characteristics that saved her life. She was literate, had maintained correspondence with a teacher from her previous institution, and most crucially, had been specifically requested by a farming family in western Massachusetts who planned to retrieve her within 6 months. The young woman's testimony revealed the systematic nature of the Cromwell operation from a victim's perspective. She described how new arrivals were immediately separated into different groups based on criteria that seemed arbitrary to the children but were actually part of Martha's calculated selection process. Some children were assigned to the main house dormitories and participated in normal daily activities, while others were taken to separate quarters behind the estate and were rarely seen again. Mary Catherine's account of daily life at the estate provided chilling insights into how the family maintained their operation while presenting a facade of legitimate charity. She described how Martha would conduct regular medical examinations that were actually assessments of children's value as murder victims, how Josiah would select certain children for special medical attention that often preceded their disappearance, and how Ezekiel would use religious instruction to identify which children had family connections that might complicate their elimination. The witness described specific incidents that demonstrated the family's calculating cruelty. She recalled watching 9-year-old Timothy Morrison being led away by Josiah for what Martha described as treatment for a minor illness, only to learn later that the boy had died during the night and been buried immediately in the family cemetery. When other children asked about Timothy's fate, they were told he had been reunited with distant relatives who had come to claim him unexpectedly. O'Brien's testimony also revealed the psychological methods the family used to control their victims and prevent resistance. Children who asked too many questions about missing companions were subjected to harsh punishments and threats, while those who remained compliant were rewarded with better treatment and privileges. The family created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that made it difficult for children to organize resistance or maintain accurate counts of their fellow residents. The witness provided crucial details about the physical infrastructure of the Cromwell operation that corroborated evidence being gathered by investigators. She described the medical facility behind the main house where she had glimpsed disturbing equipment and unusual preparations, the strange odors that occasionally emanated from the chapel basement, and the frequent nighttime activities that involved moving heavy containers between buildings on the estate. Mary Catherine's escape from the estate had been facilitated by the arrival of her prospective adoptive family earlier than expected, preventing the Cromwells from eliminating her as they had apparently planned. Her testimony revealed that Martha had become increasingly agitated about her pending departure and had been consulting with Josiah about potential complications. The witness believed that her life had been saved only by the farming family's insistence on retrieving her immediately rather than waiting for the originally scheduled date. The young woman's account of life after leaving the estate provided additional evidence of the family's criminal activities. She described how Martha had attempted to maintain contact with her adoptive family, ostensibly to monitor her successful placement but actually to ensure her continued silence about what she had witnessed. The letters Martha sent contained subtle threats disguised as expressions of concern for Mary Catherine's well-being and adjustment to her new environment. Dr. Whitmore's medical examination of O'Brien revealed physical evidence that supported her testimony about the conditions at the estate. She bore scars consistent with medical experiments and showed signs of prolonged malnutrition that contradicted the family's claims about the excellent care they provided. These physical findings provided objective corroboration for her accounts of systematic abuse and neglect. The witness's testimony also revealed the extent of the family's network of accomplices and corrupt officials. She described visits from men who were clearly not legitimate adoption agents but were treated with deference by the Cromwells, suggesting their involvement in the criminal enterprise. Her account of conversations she had overheard provided investigators with names and details that would prove crucial in unraveling the broader conspiracy. By the spring of 1845, Mary Catherine O'Brien's testimony had provided investigators with the foundation they needed to build a comprehensive case against the Cromwell family. Her survival and willingness to speak out had broken the wall of silence that had protected their operation for over 2 decades, creating the opportunity for justice that the 35 murder victims would never see for themselves. The confrontation between authorities and the Cromwell family reached its climax in March of 1845, when Massachusetts State Constable James Morrison arrived at the estate with a warrant to search the premises for evidence of criminal activity. Morrison's investigation had been prompted by the mounting evidence gathered by Rebecca Hartwell and Dr. Whitmore, combined with Mary Catherine O'Brien's devastating testimony about the systematic murders that had occurred at the House of Christian Charity. The family's response to this official intervention revealed the desperate lengths they were willing to go to protect their operation. Ezekiel initially attempted to use his religious authority as a shield, claiming that the search violated the sanctity of their charitable mission and demanding that Morrison respect their rights as servants of God. When this approach failed to deter the constable, the family's facade of respectability began to crumble as their underlying criminality became apparent. Martha's behavior during the search provided particularly damning evidence of their guilt. She was discovered attempting to burn documents in the kitchen fireplace when Morrison entered the main house, and her frantic efforts to destroy evidence only served to confirm investigators' suspicions about the nature of their activities. The partially burned papers that Morrison recovered included correspondence with medical colleges, financial records showing suspicious transactions, and most incriminatingly, portions of Martha's victim ledger. The search of the medical facility behind the main house yielded horrifying evidence that confirmed the worst suspicions about the Cromwell operation. Morrison and his deputies discovered surgical instruments stained with blood, preservation chemicals used for preparing cadavers, and specialized containers designed for transporting human remains. More disturbing still were the personal effects of missing children, clothing, shoes, and small treasures that had belonged to victims whose families would never see them again. Josiah's reaction to the discovery of evidence in his medical facility demonstrated the psychological toll that 22 years of murder had taken on the family members. the young man suffered what appeared to be a complete nervous breakdown, alternating between catatonic silence and hysterical confessions that provided investigators with detailed accounts of their killing methods. His medical training had made him the family's most effective killer, but it had also left him uniquely vulnerable to the psychological consequences of his crimes. The constable's examination of the chapel basement revealed the most damning evidence against the family: the carefully arranged skeletal remains of 17 children, stored on stone shelves like macabre inventory awaiting shipment. The methodical organization of these remains demonstrated the systematic nature of their operation, while the variety of preservation techniques used suggested that different victims had been prepared for different types of buyers. Ezekiel's final desperate attempt to maintain his innocence involved claiming that the evidence had been planted by enemies seeking to destroy his ministry. He accused Rebecca Hartwell of orchestrating a conspiracy against his family, motivated by jealousy of their successful charitable work and resentment of their social position. His increasingly frantic denials only served to convince investigators that they had uncovered the truth about his family's decades of criminal activity. The discovery of Martha's complete ledger hidden behind a loose stone in the chapel wall provided investigators with comprehensive documentation of the family's crimes. The leather-bound book contained detailed records of 35 murders committed between 1823 and 1845, including victims' names, ages, dates of death, methods of killing, and profits derived from each transaction. The clinical precision of these records revealed a level of premeditation and calculation that shocked even experienced investigators. The family's network of corrupt accomplices began to unravel rapidly as news of the investigation spread throughout Salem County. Sheriff's Deputy William Morse fled the area before he could be arrested, while County Clerk Harrison Blackwood attempted to destroy official records that documented his complicity in providing false death certificates. Their panicked reactions provided additional confirmation of the conspiracy's extent and the number of officials who had been compromised. The emotional impact of the discoveries at the estate was profound, not only for investigators but for the entire community that had unknowingly harbored these killers for over 2 decades. Parents who had sent children to the House of Christian Charity demanded answers about their fate, while neighbors struggled to comprehend how they had failed to detect the horrors occurring just beyond their awareness. The physical evidence recovered during the search included not only human remains and documentary proof of the crimes, but also the tools and infrastructure that had enabled the family's operation. Investigators catalogued surgical instruments, preservation equipment, transportation containers, and communication devices that revealed the sophisticated nature of their criminal enterprise. The sheer scope of their operation astounded officials who had never encountered anything comparable in their experience. As news of the arrests spread beyond Salem County, the Cromwell case became a sensation that captured national attention. Newspapers throughout New England published detailed accounts of the investigation, while religious leaders struggled to explain how a supposedly Christian family could have committed such systematic atrocities. The case would ultimately force significant changes in child welfare laws and oversight of charitable institutions, ensuring that similar operations could never again operate with such devastating impunity.